Hello everyone and welcome to our weekly news roundup in blockchain gaming. Today is Friday 21st of March. I am Jenny Jordan and with me is John Jordan. Hi John, how are you?
Glad I'm not flying back from GDC into Heathrow today, where all
Yeah,
flights have been cancelled. just what you want after a week of not sleeping very well.
well that's
To
part of the reason why you don't go travelling so much anymore, isn't it? Can't handle the stress of
all the stress. Yeah, I suppose I'd be travelling back into Manchester anyway. So I think they're trying to divert a lot of flights into Manchester, but I
yeah.
suppose it's better to be diverted to Manchester than not take off at all. But you can imagine just flying back from a week of GDC and end up in Manchester when you want to be in, I don't know,
Probably
Brighton.
have a mix of flu and COVID and all that lot as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, all fun. Right, so yeah, obviously it's been GDC this week, but I would say there hasn't really been any major news, not in Web3 gaming anyway.
No.
So the Avalanche, which had sort of the biggest booth last year, only had a small booth on sort of the show floor. This year, Arbitrum seems to have been the biggest kind of booth in terms of Web3 gaming, but even that hadn't been too big.
No.
And a lot of the companies weren't even represented there. So, I mean, obviously, a lot of people have been around the conference and had meetups and done networking. Wolves Den had a big Wolves DAO had a big Wolves Den kind of
Yep.
set up, and there was the panel that we get on to talk about later that got quite a lot of attention. But anyway, we're kicking off by talking about Immutable. So I'll leave that over to you. Talking about Immutable's revenue figures that came out. Not recent ones though. You should
No.
have a look at
I think just go back to a GDC thing. I think just in general, not just about blockchain gaming. It just seems this year was sort of very quiet. Like people were saying there probably weren't as many people as last year. I mean, that's partly because the last couple of years the games industry has there's fewer people in it because maybe 10% of the US dev base has been laid off, and even those people who are in sort of big companies who haven't been laid off, they're not spending so much money sending people to conferences. So this is a general sort of quiet year from that sort of point of view. So there wasn't really any big news, across any, from nowhere. No company had like a big GDC announcement. So and on Web3, definitely sort of not the case as well. Though there were the usual sort of photos of everyone taking photos of each other on Twitter and stuff, which is nice for everyone to meet up. But yeah, so I don't think this was. This was on the Monday. This news came out, and I don't think it was planned in that way. Although it sort of could have been, I suppose, in some weird way. But every company has to produce annual financials. Even sort of the smallest company has to announce to their government, how much money they've made in order to, work out what tax they're paid and stuff. Obviously, for the bigger companies and particularly ones in blockchain, that is harder. And I guess the prime example here is Animoca, which is a very big sort of company and has various different sort of revenue models. And it's always having problems getting its accounts audited. So often it puts out it's quite good at putting out these are our accounts for the year, but they're all unaudited and they sort of, it's a mixture of sort of, fiat flows and stable coins. And then they own loads of tokens in sort of made up tokens in their own companies, which may be worth billions, maybe worth nothing. It's hard from an accounting point of view to sort of work out, it's not just the price of a tower token today is what you book anyway. So that's Animoca, and another Australian company actually, Immutable, has clearly had similar problems. So their financial year runs from sort of June. So it's I guess the sort of 1st of July to the 30th of June. That's their financial year. So and they just put out their financials for the year July 2022 to June 2023. So it's, that's almost 18 months ago. So obviously normally you have a bit of time. You don't have to put your accounts in straight away. You normally have 8 months or so from when the year ends to put your accounts in. So there is you do have some delay, but this has been, these are late. And obviously you can put in late accounts, you just get fined for them generally. Blockchain games companies, I think, have a particular problem around this because their accountants, sort of, even if they're crypto accountants, sort of struggle to work out how they would book certain amounts of money compared to what the standard accounting procedure is, say in this case in Australia. So there is an issue there. But anyway, they put these accounts in, and and sort of the headline figure, I suppose, that we pulled out, or everyone sort of focused on, it was actually written up in basically, I guess, the Australian version of the Financial Times, I suppose. One of their business papers wrote this up. And for that year, so from July 2022 to June 2023, which was sort of, when the wheels started falling off a little bit, think of FTX in November 2022. Anyway, so it had revenue. Immutable had revenue of $27 million. That's US dollars. But it had costs of $77 million. So it made its revenue was 27, but it spent 77, and so it comes up with a loss of $50 million, which is obviously quite a large amount of money. Sometimes these accountant losses are not necessarily, 50. It's not like $50 million of actual dollars. Sort of, was sort of. Lost in accounting terms. So often you have things like how you book stuff like taxes and particularly how you give shares to your employees, all that sort of stuff could be accounted into that loss. So it's not actual sort of money changing hands in some ways. It's an accounting sort of procedure thing. So anyway, but it's still sort of, considerable sort of loss. And compared to the previous year, it had gone up. So in the previous year, they'd lost 31 million. So it had sales of $19 million on costs of 50 million. So the revenue had gone up year to year, but the costs had gone up more. So the nominal loss had got bigger, which is obviously not what you want to see in a company, because you can't sustain that. So, the one thing that Immutable, has raised a lot of money. So it's raised like $200 million in cash from VCs. It's probably raised, well, it definitely has raised tens of millions of dollars in crypto selling assets over the years. Quite how it's accounted for that, and whether it's kept them in crypto or whether it's sold them back to fiat or kept them as stable coins or whatever. But it did say at the end of this financial year, this 2022-2023 financial year, at the end of that, it had $280 million in cash and what they called liquid crypto. So that's probably stable coins and bigger crypto like ETH and Bitcoin. So we assume that doesn't include even its own token, IMX. We're not quite sure about that, but certainly things like the God token from Gods Unchained and the GOG token from Guild of Guardians. Those not included because obviously they're much more volatile. So in a sense, if you're nominally losing $50 million and you've got $280 million in the bank, you can do that for a number of years. You're not going to go bust at any point. But the few more interesting sort of nuggets sort of came out, and these are I don't know. I think we have to treat these with a certain level of uncertainty, because these are obviously not being audited accounts yet. But Immutable said in the following year, so the year 2023-2024, it had made $43 million in revenue. So the revenue had gone up, quite a lot again from the 27 million the previous year. It didn't say anything about costs or so we couldn't work out the profit and loss. If we assumed it had cost, it had spent $77 million in costs the previous year, then probably costs probably wouldn't have come down to 43 million. So it would probably still loss making in that next year. And they also said that at the end of 2024, so much closer in time, it had $140 million in cash and liquid crypto. So we can see that number's come down a lot. So that number has sort of come down by 140 million in 18 months. So that's the sort of the worrying thing, was if it's losing $50 million nominally, then it had, it could do that for another 5 years at that rate, because it had 280 whatever. But now it's only got 140. That's still a lot, but suddenly you can't be really losing $50 million even in nominal terms, because that's eating in quite a lot of your capital reserves. And probably Immutable, people are not going out and doing big fundraisers at the moment from VCs, because VCs are not really doing that certainly for blockchain games companies. And it's not like Immutable is a big profitable company that can raise more money. So it's definitely, it's interesting to get some view on how these companies are operating. I mean, Animoca is interesting because it's profitable, I suppose. So that's a much easier sort of situation. But for Immutable, one of their earlier investors said that giving a comment to this newspaper who'd written the story, said, "Oh, I expect them to be cash flow positive this financial year," which sort of, cash flow is a sort of again another accounting term, but roughly I'd assume him to be meaning they're not going to lose money this year, so they're going to be not profitable, but at some point in this year they won't be loss making. They may still have a loss in the whole financial year, but basically his views are they're coming good now. The years of losses are over, and now it's going to be start to get positive. So we're assuming that's true, but maybe he's talking it up because he's an investor and he's positive about it because he's invested money in it. So anyway, you just sort of see a situation where Immutable, from a financial point of view, hasn't been doing great, but often startups can lose money for a number of years until they, Uber and people like that can lose tons and tons of money for ages and then become massively profitable. Probably for Immutable, it's not quite at the stage yet where we can say it's going to become massively profitable because it hasn't got that big hit game yet, which is sort of Axie had back in the day, or when you have those big hit games, they just do, in crypto terms, print money because it means the token underlying them gets very valuable, and then you basically you did really well out of that.
Well, I was going to get to the point of asking some more tangibly kind of what would it be, do you think, that kind of indicate why would Immutable suddenly stop being cash flow positive during one of the most difficult, challenging years that most of the industry is sort of facing? They have, what would be the strength that would say, well, this is going to turn it around? They haven't announced that they've cut down, say, 70% of staff or anything like that. Not yet, anyway. They might do that. But what would have caused like a turnaround? They haven't got a mass hit game yet either. Are they still sort of just relying on that game coming, or what do you think?
Again, there have been sort of certain information about its headcount over the years. So we think at one point, it was sort of the start of this cycle, 2021, it was about sort of 200-ish people or 150 people, and they were saying that they were going to hire 200. So we think at a certain point, this is not like official figures or anything, this is sort of like reading between the lines a little bit. We think they got up to about 400 at their peak. And obviously that would be probably this year, 2022, 2023, when your costs are that big. There's a certain amount of cost you can spend on marketing, so you're doing sort of B2C marketing apps and stuff, but they didn't really have, Guild of Guardians wasn't out then, which is what they probably spent the most on. So you're spending some money at shows like GDC, some amount of millions. But mainly for companies like this, it's going to be staff costs. So we do know they've had 2 rounds of redundancies. We don't think they were massive in terms of, Sky maybe said they cut 31%, I think. It seems not quite that Immutable has sort of cut at that level, but it's lost some level of people, and obviously people leave over time as well. So you don't have to sort of necessarily sack people. People will just sort of churn out. So we think they probably are down to now under 300. So they probably could still be cutting. The two, obviously they're running a blockchain platform that requires a certain number of people and biz dev and all that sort of stuff. They have 2 games they're doing sort of internally. So Gods Unchained, I think, is still being developed internally, so it's an internal team there. And then Guild of Guardians is an external team, so that's not people that Immutable is has on staff, but they're sort of obviously paying as a sort of outsourced thing. So I guess the big levers they have is Guild of Guardians clearly hasn't worked as a game, as we sort of suggested many times. I mean, I play it every day, but it's just not worked as a proposition. It's declining in revenue, declining in users. So maybe an obvious thing would be if they got rid of that game, they'd save millions of dollars a year. But obviously there'd be a reputational hit that one of their internal big games had been sort of shut down. And obviously in blockchain, you try not to have that sort of negative stuff. And for someone like Immutable, which is a platform, that might be seen as bad for them. That might be bad for their token. Equally, you could do it the other way and go...
Immutable. It's not immutable. Yeah. Not immutable.
And obviously, people who hold NFTs, like myself, would be a bit annoyed. But the other thing for Immutable, just go, we can't. We just worked out we can't make games. We're all about the third-party developers. So you can always spin it certain ways, and you can always... I mean, they could always give back Guild of Guardian players some other, they could could do some refund thing or something like that. It's not impossible. That's one way. I think in the early days everyone just thought, and so from a personal point of view, when all these NFTs were just selling for ridiculous amounts of money, you just thought, oh, money's gone. It's kind of the magic money tree is throwing off money. We can just spend all we like, and there's no sort of implications for that. We can just keep doing it because crypto is going to take over the world. So clearly those sort of cycles as those cycles stop and bad times happen, then people have to think more from a business point of view. What are we actually trying to do here, and do we need all these people? So I think the major thing is, they can control costs. Revenues are going up. I don't quite know why revenues are going up. Obviously, they're signing up a lot more games. So quite what the financial cuts between these different games and Immutable are. Maybe, I imagine if these games have tokens, maybe Immutable gives them some of the tokens and they get some of their tokens back. So maybe the accounting of how you handle those sort of tokens, which aren't live yet, may mean they can sort of look like they're growing revenue. But I agree. It's a sort of difficult thing to see that it's hard to see. They might be able to grow their revenue, 10, 20, 30% a year. That sort of, I think companies can sort of do that. Although it's certainly not easy. But to sort of 10x your revenue, which is probably what they would be looking to do over the next 5 years. I mean, that as you say, just requires a massive game on their platform, and we haven't seen that yet. And the Ravens Quest went live. Was it last Friday? Yeah. I think it's done okay. I mean, it's not a fully on-chain game, but at all, it's had about regularly sort of 10,000 daily active unique wallets. So, there are people playing it. But again, it's not. Crypto Twitter is not ripped up with loads of people saying Ravens Quest is the best blockchain game ever. Everyone come out and play it. So there's a few people who really like it, obviously, but it's
I have to admit,
really
they got sort of completely wrong. I think a lot of people were playing it already on PC because it was available in certain regions anyway. And then last Friday, I think did it have its global launch on PC? But I thought it was mobile, but it appears it's still sort of.
I think
the mobile release is still a work in progress.
I think we got a bit confused, didn't we? I think from what I could see, I think people were previously playing on a test net. So maybe you're right, it was different territories. But when I was playing before the global launch official, it just said test net. And then it went on so I think it was just you were playing, but everything was going to get wiped. And then you were sort of, anything that wasn't an NFT land or something your progress was going to get wiped and you started again. That's the point
kind of would be that I wonder if that sort of in a way undermines the launch a little bit. That kind of it wasn't as big and spectacular as it could have been because people had already been playing, like most of the audience had already been playing it on testnet, and then it was whatever. Anyway, so that happened last week. Let's move on. This week we had 3 games, I think, announcing that they're coming to consoles. Or was it 2 Web3 games? And one was last week, I think. So 3 in the span of the last 2 weeks. Obviously, Off the Grid was the first one to announce it was coming to Xbox, and it had its early play test as well for PlayStation 5 in October 2024. That was sort of a big milestone for the industry. And then since then, we've had 5 more titles. So in the span of sort of the following 6 months, announcing that they are also coming to consoles. None of them are currently live, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. So there was initially it was Moonray, the shooter, and then it was My Pet Hooligan, recently announcing that it would come to Xbox, if I get that right.
Yep.
Then we had The Bournless saying they're also coming to Xbox.
Yep.
And then this week we had, is that 4? No, that's,
yeah,
that's 4. And then this week, Paradise Tycoon, the from Finnish developer, Empires Not Vampires. That's the first mobile game to announce. Web3 mobile game announcing is coming to consoles. We don't know which consoles. It kind of just says a bit vague that they're working with a game publisher that has launched games on both Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox, I think. So it might be all of those. I don't know that. But then also Forgotten Universe announced sort of just a couple of hours later, actually, that they had a deal to come on all 3 consoles, Nintendo, Xbox, and PlayStation 5. So, and they said, "Are we the first one?"
Although
I don't know if they're the first one, but
I think the slight, you have to have a slight amount of nuance here. I think so. I think certainly for the Forgotten Universe one, I think what they were actually saying was they had approved developer status on those platforms. So you can have approved development status and still have your game rejected, I think. So the fact that they are they basically can get access to the sort of dev kits and stuff that you need and the support from those companies in order to make games for those platforms. I think there's still an approvals process that you go through in order to get those games released. So there's a slight I think some of those things will somewhat be overplayed. But you're right. I mean, it is clear now that from off the grid onwards, that it's definitely not the case that console companies are going, we're not taking blockchain games in a way that say Steam isn't allowing. So I guess they are dealing with it on a more case by case basis. I'm sure there's still lots of things that you wouldn't be able to do. Obviously, you still see that on app stores. So Apple and Google. I mean, it stopped becoming a thing where a blockchain game has gone live on the app stores. I mean, that was a thing. I don't know. Would it have been 2 years ago, I suppose, when NFL Rivals sort of first went live? Yeah, that was. Oh wow, app stores are allowing people to do blockchain games. And there was lots of debate previously about whether they did or whether they didn't, and we got all hot under the collar about that. But that's just a regular thing now that people know how to do it. And there's still restrictions, but people are getting around that. And I guess the other sort of thing that that they've announced. Wildcard announced it's going to go on consoles. Hasn't said which. But obviously, from their point of view, as we spoke about last week, they're just putting out a Web 2 game, so there's no blockchain in that game, so they can put it on Steam and consoles without any problems in terms of that. And then they have the Web 3 structure around this sort of streaming platform. So I don't know if they get the streaming platform on the consoles as well. Probably that would be a little bit harder, but maybe you could play. I'm sure the console games could have a integration with the Thousands platform, which is their streaming platform, which is on PC. So developers are finding sort of ways and means of leveraging these sort of platforms to get their games out there, and then working at how to put blockchain. But it is interesting how we've gone from these are the first games on app stores, and then we get quite excited about Blankos is the first game through the Epic Game Store, and then we had big articles about how many games were on the Epic Game Store. I can't remember if we've given up counting now. It's hundreds, isn't it?
Pretty much, yeah.
So we're going through the same thing for consoles. So eventually, all the platforms are getting it, apart from Steam, which I don't think.
It's like you say though, it has some sort of more significance rather than just us sitting being geeky with numbers and such, trying to be clever. It does show a sort of what's happening in the industry and the trend. And like you say, there weren't any, and then suddenly October we had the big breakthrough of the grid, and since it's really picked up. More sort of significantly. We know that also Mythical Games, John Linden has sort of alluded to some of their games talking about coming to consoles. We don't know which ones. Obviously, Blanco was the initial one to announce it would potentially come to console. It didn't happen, but Mythical is clearly still in talks with those platforms to sort of work something out there.
But I guess the other thing is, as blockchain games have come to these platforms, it's not like they've had a massive hit. I mean, so there's lots of. It's not a panacea to. I think it's another helpful thing, but
it's not brought 3 billion players into Web3 gaming. No, exactly. You're right. Yeah. And actually, talking about that, some people would probably say that Off the Grid, with its 13 million people on the guns blockchain, would be kind of seen as that's made Web3 more mainstream or so. But as we've sort of mentioned in the past, I think that those users on the guns blockchain aren't necessarily players of Off the Grid. It's hard to distinguish. We don't know yet actually how many daily active wallets there are that are actually playing Off the Grid, just because there are users on the guns blockchain. And actually, when Off the Grid went live on Xbox Limit Breaks, Gabe Leydon said that was one of the biggest breakthroughs in Web3 gaming. So we don't know. Limit Break might have plans to go sort of down that route.
Possibly. I just think Gabe Leydon's always done mobile games, so obviously he could do. But I think he's very mobile. Mm-hmm. His brain works in a very mobile way.
Talking of which, there was a panel at GDC, with Limit Breaks, Gabe Leydon, and YGG's Gabby Dyson. Is that how you say it? Dyson?
Dyson, I think.
even. Sorry if I got that wrong. They were talking about app tokens, and that's funny because start of the week we had a Mavens feature out on the website discussing app tokens, where we normally we get sort of about 20. Well, anyone can go and check, but I think about sort of 15 to 20 responses from the various experts that we sort of query monthly on various industry topics. This month we had quite a few rejecting it because they didn't want to get into the discussion, and quite a few rejecting it because they didn't have time. They were traveling, obviously, GDC and that. We had 3 responses in the end, and none of them were overly positive about app tokens. Then there was the panel on the Tuesday, and that really highlighted all the sort of the features and the strengths of the app tokens and the token master protocol. So can you talk us through a little bit sort of what it is again? Just remind us, it's quite technical. Yep. What it is, how it can be used, how your own view has sort of changed a little bit over time. And also maybe it was quite a fun reaction to the Mavens feature from
Yeah, so very very quickly. So so app tokens are come from this company Limit Break, and it comes from the work they've done on ERC 721 protocol. So there's this thing called ERC 721C, and that basically lots of things you could do in there. But basically, it was about enforcing creator royalties. So if I say I create an NFT collection, and I say for every transaction I get 5% of that. That is enforced in the smart contract, and marketplaces cannot get around that, which is the big problem in sort of 2023 when Blur as a marketplace came up and basically stopped paying people, stopped paying creators the royalty on that trading, and so there's no sort of, that wasn't the only reason that NFTs sort of ran out of steam, but that was sort of one of the big reasons. So. But sort of for NFTs, it's sort of I think initially for me made a bit more sense because you could do weird things like you could set a minimum like a floor price, like your NFT could never sell below this price and it could never sell above this price. So that's sort of quite an interesting concept. We'd never, that sort of seemed a bit sort of centralized. I mean, it's happening in a decentralized way in terms of the smart contract, but it seemed like psychologically. For some people who were buying NFTs or certainly trading NFTs, that seemed really odd that you would sort of cap that. But for NFTs, it sort of made more sense than doing it for ERC20 tokens, the basic tokens on Ethereum, which is what this new app tokens protocol is about. So it took me a bit of time to really get my head around it. And I guess it's really, and I think for the industry as well, it's really only come to fruition in the last sort of few months where pretty much every gaming token has lost 50% or more of its value, not because of anything that's happened on particularly to gaming on blockchain, but just that's how the crypto sentiment has gone. There's lots of meme coins and sort of Bitcoin as sort of the key kind of asset, and everything else got dumped. And clearly the problem then becomes is if your token is lost 50% or in some cases 90% of its value, that can affect how the economy, for the game that may or may not be live, but certainly if the game's live and the economy drops by 90% in USD value, then that can really impact obviously motivation of people and also just how the game sort of basically works. So we've seen more and more people realizing that sort of just having free floating tokens as a core part of your game economy is just bonkers because if it goes down, it's really bad. And also if it goes up, it gets really bad as well because, as we saw back in days with Axie Infinity, when it became like $300 to buy an Axie, you needed 3 of them to even play the game. That just sort of destroyed the game as a game, and it became what many people thought was a Ponzi scheme, although we won't go into all that again. So I think over time, we've sort of seen some level of control is a good thing. And what app tokens do is sort of codify that into some features. And obviously no game has gone live with this app tokens thing yet, so we're a little bit sort of waiting to see what developers do with it. But there are some really interesting things. So you can create a token that's only that's used for marketing and can only be sort of redeemed in the game. So that's sort of quite useful because you're sort of you're creating a token that can't be sort of held on exchanges, can't be traded away. It can only be used in the game. So you're sort of giving away free money, but people have to go into the game to play it. And obviously you can use that to sort of get them into a certain level in the game. You can have tokens that are untradable, until you get to a certain level in the game. So maybe if you get to level 10, you can trade 10% of your tokens out, and as you go up, similar things. You can have similar things.
What Wildcard has done, isn't it?
Yes.
They've given away VC tokens that aren't tradable yet, but will be eventually when they're sort of ready for it.
Yeah. And in general, the more I've thought about it, and we discuss it quite a lot as well. The more I've seen, Apptoken is as I say, a certain codification of a way of doing these things. But we see examples. Other games are using the broader concepts around Apptokens, which is about things like, can you trade your tokens? Can they be held on exchanges? Do you have fixed exchange rates, maybe between tokens that you want to have them on the blockchain because you have a fully on-chain game, but they're not speculative tokens. They're like wood and iron and cotton and gold, and you just want to, in terms of how the game works, you just want to have a fixed way of how those things exchange. Equally, you might want to have a fixed way. So even though it's a sort of a crypto token, this one can only be exchanged for this one other token. So you're sort of limiting the volatility, because you can say my game token can only be exchanged for USDC or a stable coin or something like that. So these are sort of concepts that we haven't really seen in games, but we are seeing people in different ways, because all blockchain game developers are struggling with this same sort of volatility, and they're obviously very smart people. They're all thinking about how can I protect my game against these sort of things. And I guess what Gabe Leydon and Limit Break have done as very experienced people in the mobile game space, and very well funded. They've raised $200 million, so they've had time to sit around and think about these things more deeply than other people. They've sort of come up with, as I say, a sort of a sort of a whole sort of systemized way of thinking about these things, which it may or may not work, but it may just be the fact they've put this thing out. And I think with Apptokens, you don't have to use the whole thing. You could use the Apptoken standard and just use one aspect of what they're doing. So from that point of view, it's quite flexible. But I think with a game designer's hat on, maybe the more of them you use, the more you can feel like you've structured a game economy that isn't just going to get speculated away either up or down, and that's the important thing. And I think when it first came out, I was probably maybe dismissive is the right word, actually, but a bit dismissive. Then quite quickly sort of started to realise there was some key aspects of it. And I think we see that throughout the games industry, that the blockchain games industry, that some people haven't heard of it. Some people are really sort of a little bit sort of see the light on it. So Chris Heatherley, this guy who's doing the Mystery Society, which is the sort of game that seems to have shut down, he's now sort of jokingly saying he's like the spokesman for sort of Apptokens and stuff. He's really because he's seen firsthand that what the problems with tokens can do to a game. So, and other people are, I think from a more philosophical point of view, just still think a developer having that level of control over their economy is a bad thing. But Gabe's he's also this fascinating character, but he's really like the whole problem with blockchain games, or the whole problem with crypto really, is he's saying we've allowed too much Web 2 stuff into blockchain, by which he means people holding tokens on Binance, which is not which I think to some degree he doesn't feel centralized exchanges are proper crypto, because they're obviously they can do what they like with the not your keys, not your crypto. And he sort of points out one of the problems with Ethereum at the moment is it's billions, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of value, but the actual fees it's generating as a sort of a protocol on a daily basis I think $300,000 yesterday he was saying. So he's saying we really have to rethink a lot of what our views on Web 2 and Web 3 and blockchain are, in order to get the real benefits that a lot of us think will happen, but we've not seen them. And he's sort of trying to come up with.
Kind of both sides are sort of arguing that Web 3 and the decentralization of Web 3 is being undermined, where the kind of more skeptical people, Apptoken skeptical people, would say it's giving too much control to developers. We don't want that centralization. Whereas the sort of more Apptokens protagonists would sort of say, well, there is already that centralization undermining Web3, but it's in the hands of the big exchanges and not in the hands of the developers and the creators, where it should be. So both have got sort of, you would say, a fair point in a way.
And I think there's this whole thing, isn't it? If people want to get on exchanges because that gives you lots of trading volatility, but then trading volume. But then the people who, Gabe says again, 99% of people holding game tokens are holding them on exchanges, and those tokens never see a game. So, and that impacts the game's, sort of financial success. Whereas if you force people to not, it's difficult to say you couldn't have tokens on exchanges. I suppose exchanges probably could work around that. If basically you force people to be holding their own tokens, then you're going to force them. They're only going to hold those tokens if they're going to be playing the game, or much likely to be able to sort of play the game. So he says at the moment, top of the tree in crypto is the exchanges, and then traders and developers are at the bottom. And he says using Apptokens, he wants developers to be at the top and traders in the middle and exchanges to be at the bottom. He just thinks exchanges, Binance's and Coinbase's, have much too much power, and certainly are not good sort of gatekeepers of what game developers want to do in the space. And someone who's more into decentralization, I fully agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right, good. Let's move on. Jurassic World is coming to the Sandbox. So the Sandbox has announced a partnership with, let's have a look what they are called, officially, Universal Pictures and Amblin Entertainment, to bring the Jurassic World franchise into the Sandbox in the form of an experience called Jurassic World Dinosaur Preserve. And this is going to be rolled out in conjunction with Sandbox's Alpha Season 5, I think, coming in end of March or April.
Soon.
Soon.
No, March.
Soon.
They said March.
March, I think it's first quarter or March. Yeah. Good. You excited? You playing the Sandbox quite a lot these days?
Yeah. So I sort of resurrected the Sandbox Daily YouTube channel. So actually, for the past couple of weeks, I have been trying to play like a Sandbox, experience, they call them. So a Sandbox experience. So as you say, the alpha, the numbered alpha seasons are the sort of the big sort of marketing events where they bring people into these branded events, and you play them and you get sand tokens. They give away quite a lot of sand tokens for doing various sort of missions and stuff. And they sort of cycle through these different experiences. So they're not all available across the entire alpha season, but they sort of cycle through them. So that's sort of worked quite well for them. Season 4, I think, did quite well. So the ones I'm playing are just basically the UGC that sort of individuals or game developers have been playing, and there's sort of obviously a typical range of quality. From some of them are pretty good. The one problem those all have is, even if they're giving sand away as rewards, they don't seem to have any mechanism for giving it direct to your wallet. So you have to, a lot of them go, I'll take a screenshot and come to our Discord and we'll sort of send you the sand. So there is that's the sort of the obvious problem I've noticed for the UGC sort of indie stuff, which they don't have in the big sort of alpha ones, because it's all sort of built in much more to a sort of questing system. But I'm getting I'm warming to the Sandbox a little bit, and I do think that something like Jurassic Park is I can say the perfect one, maybe not the perfect one, but is a brand that you just kind of feel works really well in the Sandbox, in the sense that everyone sort of loves dinosaurs, and whether the actual experience they're doing is going to be sort of super cool. I mean, I'm sure it'll be you can make quite complex stuff in the Sandbox. So I'm sure it'll be good. But you can just imagine.
It looks quite good from the assets so far.
Yeah, but it's the assets, so you can get it looks like over a dozen different dinosaur types. Obviously ends up in the T-Rex, but lots of different sort of dinosaurs. They look sort of sort of good, sort of boxy sort of dinosaurs, and they're having a thing where you can get an egg and sort of hatch these dinosaurs. I'm not quite sure how you get the eggs, whether you buy them, I assume, and they're also doing a land sale around the Jurassic Park lands, and if you get one of those, you get dinosaur assets as well. So I just think it'll be sort of quite invigorating for them, and I just as someone who sort of messed around with some of these things, just those assets are gonna they'll be obviously limited in terms of value, but you can imagine obviously people want to watch a T-Rex or a Velociraptor, or some of these dinosaurs would be sought after items. So I think that was I think the Sandbox just has too many brands, and too many of them are sort of quite obscure. So some of the recent ones they've done, I've just they sort of just pass me by. They're not. If you're not part of that sort of fandom, then sort of meaningless. But obviously, everyone knows Jurassic Park, so I think it'd be a good one for them to launch. So I'm from that point of view, looking forward to Alpha 5 and seeing how it goes.
Good. Finally, we haven't announced anything. This industry hasn't really announced any sort of big new Web3 games recently, but one that was announced this week actually is from Guild Games. They are making kind of a browser-based, seems like a fairly sort of simple experience. LOL Land, it's called. So it's coming out exclusively on Abstract, which is the Pudgy Penguins company Igloo's chain that only launched mainnet earlier this year. Coming out in April, 15th of April, it's launching on Abstract. Okay. So obviously it's got closer sort of more partnerships, more collaborations with Igloo, in the sense that Pudgy Penguins also will be sort of represented in the game, the licensed Pudgy Penguins, and you'll be able to earn Abstract XP, I think, as well as YG tokens and other sort of experience kind of points and stuff like that. Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Well, there's not an awful lot of information, is there? I mean, they call it like a game for DGens. I don't quite know what the DGen element is, because DGen element is normally your wagering stuff. So, in terms of the gameplay, it's like a very simple Monopoly Go, where you're going around, you're rolling a dice and going around and picking up sort of prizes and stuff. So as you say, this is sort of part of the sort of wider push for Abstract, which is the Igloo's, who is the company behind Pudgy Penguins. That's their blockchain, and they're trying to make it very much like the easiest blockchain for people to get involved with. And they're doing this. They've been running this sort of seasonal XP thing, also weekly. It's very the typical social farming, or do things, get XP, get higher on the leaderboard list, get some tokens when they come out. I mean, for me, I'm a bit bored of all that sort of stuff personally. I don't think this is, it's not going to be a massive long running game for forever and ever. And I guess interesting. YGG decided they wanted to sort of do a game, and I guess they'll add it into their sort of regular campaigns and stuff. But I guess it seems to me that there must be something else in there in the game, some sort of meta game that will appeal to DGens. And some people in that sort of space are quite. There are a group of people who are really into farming Abstract XP. One of the big things they have is they have a sort of inbuilt streaming platform. So lots of people are sort of streaming, and so it's like a Twitch, but you do tips in the Pengu token and all this sort of stuff as well. So there are, not particularly me, but there are some people who are really, really into that sort of stuff. So I would assume this game must have some sort of element of why you would want to stream it, because I think that's really the point of Abstract, is they're really trying to get become this whole singing, all dancing platform where streaming is a big part of that, and games feeding into the streaming stuff. So, but in order to make those games interesting, they have to have some sort of particular element that makes them interesting to streaming, not just playing Monopoly Go. So there must be some sort of PvP or something in there. But we'll find out more, as you say, fairly soon.
Good. All right. On that note, let's finish off. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.